All right, guys. Welcome to episode 1 of the Schola Progenium. So, in this series, I'm going to teach you how to play Kill Team Into the Dark. So, in today's episode, we're going to be going over just some basic rules of Kill Team Into the Dark and terrain, and probably finish up with TacOps selection. So, what is Kill Team Into the Dark? It's got a few different rules than basic Kill Team. As you can see, our first rule is going to be a new action called Guard. And so basically what Guard allows you to do is you set up and you do an Overwatch action when an enemy model finishes a action that while it's in your line of sight. So this basically allows you to just kind of get a free shot off. There's a couple ways you can do this. So either you can perform an Overwatch, you can perform a free fight action, so it allows you to fight before the enemy model would be able to fight if you were in engagement range, or you can do what's called a point blank Overwatch. And so basically what this is it allows you to fire weapons while in engagement range. However, if you do so, you can't perform any attacks in a fight action. The next rule is we have Hatchway fight. So as you can see in the diagram, you move up to a hatchway, and you have your model touching the access point right here. And if you are touching this access point, then you can then fight another model that is within 1 inch, or sorry, that is within 2 inches of the hatch itself. So basically what this allows you to do is, let's say we have two models right here. They would normally be positioning themselves so they're exactly 1 inch away from the line right here, so you wouldn't be able to fight them. This allows you to get around that. You're not going to be seeing this too much, except for a scenario that I'm going to cover in a later episode, but it is useful to know. This is treated as a fight action, so it follows all the same rules as the fight action, other than the different engagement ranges. Do note that you are not in engagement range of these models if your model is touching here. So although you would be allowed to fight them, those models would still be able to shoot you if they could activate, or your models would be able to shoot them if they wanted to activate. Also, we have a rule called Condensed environment. So this does two things. First of all, it makes blast, splash, and or torrent weapons gain the lethal 5+ special rule. So any weapon that has one of those three special rules also gains lethal 5+ and condensed environment. So I will let you know, all Into the Dark games are just automatically condensed environment. However, these are also rules that you can use in other forms of Kill Team if you so choose. There's a couple other things added with this condensed environment rule. So the next thing is, if you look at this diagram right here, if you are shooting through models that have the engage order and are within your line of sight, you subtract 1 from the attack's characteristic of your weapon. Okay? So let's say we have this Navis Endurant right here. It is shooting at a Kroot Cutskin. Or sorry, it's shooting at the Kroot Warrior right here, right? If you draw your cover line right here, you're covering the Kroot Cutskin, therefore you would be a 1 shot less than the Kroot Warrior. However, there's a way to get around this. First of all, let's say your Navis Armsman wants to fire behind the Endurant. If you touch a friendly model's base, you can see through them and shoot them. So that's something to be aware of. Both friendly and enemy models can block shots in this way. Barricades moved a little bit. So now let's see, we can load our board. Let's just load up any old mission. Okay, so we got our board. So you can place barricades anywhere on the map, assuming I'm the blue player, right? Anywhere on the map that's outside of 6 inches of your opponent's deployment zone. So you could set up all the way out here. And the other stipulation, it's got to be 2 inches from a hatchway and 2 inches from another barricade. So the terrain here is a little bit different than your average game. There's a lot of heavy terrain. You can see there's these things called hatches that are going to be throughout the map. It's going to drastically change how you're going to be approaching the enemy. First of all, there's a lot of obscuring terrain. Everything except the barricades is heavy terrain, like I already stated. And because it's heavy, that means it's going to be obscuring. So your barricades are going to be used more as an offensive tool than a defensive tool, because you're going to already have access to a whole bunch of terrain that you can hide in. Let me load some models in so we can kind of do some... what do I want to use? Let's use Corsairs. Corsairs are cool. All right. So, look at these badasses. If you guys don't like Eldar, fuck you. Anyways, so we have my little duelist over here, right? This guy's hiding. If you were to shoot him right now, because you draw a rectangle around the hatch, you'd be in cover. Okay? Something to keep in mind that... Let me load in a dude with a fat base. These Gellerpox. Everyone freaking loves these guys. Alright, so we have a Gellerpox with a fat base, right? This dude right here, his base is bigger than the hatchway, right? There's a couple things that I want to talk about in regards to this. First of all, if this guy has the conceal order, right? If he's got the conceal order, technically speaking, until there's an FAQ regarding this, this guy would be unable to be shot at because his base is wider than the actual hatch itself. It's something to be aware of. Furthermore, the hatch rules allow you to move your model 1 inch on either side of the hatch. So basically, if you think of this entire doorway right here, this is your movement area. So you would be able to go all the way like through here, through here. Obviously, you can't move through these points right here. That's something to be aware of. But it does allow you, like, you know, assuming these guys are on the same team, right? Let's say you add a dude right here and a dude with a bigger base right here. This guy'd still be able to move through the hatch. You cannot move through enemy models unless you have fly, obviously. Or some other rule that allows you to do so, and you cannot move through bases. So keep that in mind when you're positioning your guys here. You still can't move through bases. So if your guy's right here and you're trying to move through here, guess what, buddy? You're staying there. However, just position your guy ahead of time right there, and boom, you're moving through no problem. Okay? Obviously, like I mentioned earlier, we have hatches right here, right? So these hatches are new. It costs an action point to open them, and when you open them, you have to open them to the fullest extent that they can open, which is about the same in real life. This terrain is basically an exact copy of real life Into the Dark. Obviously, I'm using this on TTS just because it's easier to explain things and show tactics. So that is the terrain. Going back to the barricades part, I said that I normally would use these things offensively, and what do I mean by that? Okay, well, so as I can show you, we have a lot of heavy terrain here. So if you want access to cover, you pretty much have access to heavy cover no matter where you are. There's two uses you want barricades at. So first of all, the easiest one is you can put it down on a barricade or a objective right here, right? This is very straightforward. You want to put a guy on the objective, you put a barricade there. It makes sense, right? Well, here's another way you can use barricades, all right? As you can see, the red player has access to this objective by moving through this corridor, okay? Let's say I'm playing Gellerpox Infected, right? And my opponent is the Corsairs. Well, I know that Corsairs are super speedy and fast, right? So chances are, if they put dudes here, they're probably going to be able to move a guy all the way onto the objective. Well, I don't want that if I'm Gellerpox, because I want to slow my opponent down, and I want to make sure that they're not getting to the objective. So what you can do with barricades is you can actually use them to block off corridors. If I put this barricade right here, obviously this is 2 inches away, just making sure. Yep, we got 2 inches right here, right? So now if my dude moves through here, guess what? This barricade is wide enough to make it so I can't move across this area without moving over the barricade. So that's going to slow him down. Now you can double up on this. I mean, obviously, assuming you're outside of 2 inches, right? So you measure out 2 inches right there, and you can put another barricade down and basically make it really freaking hard for your opponent to get there. Now, obviously, they're going to, because they're Eldar, they're going to be able to get there in 2 activations. However, 2 barricades would probably be sufficient to completely nullify their ability to get there on turn 1. Let's see if you're able to go 9 dash. Yeah, even with a triple dash, with which Eldar can do with some shenanigans, you're still not making it there. So I mean that completely shuts down my opponent getting this objective. Now, I normally wouldn't double up barricades like this. This is one example. I would typically spread them out and put them in positions like, okay, so you want to block your opponent from getting across the room quickly. So you throw this barricade down, and all of a sudden they now have to go this way, and you just ate up like 2 to 3 inches of movement by just placing your barricades down. You probably want to place it a little bit closer. Not within 2 inches, obviously, but I would place it something like that. You basically make them eat up a whole bunch of movement having to move this way or this way. And it's even better if your opponent's running like bigger model bases like this. So yeah, that's kind of the basics of using barricades. If you want to, you can still use them defensively. How I would use them defensively is you would set them up. So you're going to be setting up a guy who's going to usually be a gunner, and he's going to be sitting in the back. Ideally, this is someone who has a way to ignore obscuring. So I'm thinking of like, towel marker lights or the hunter clade. Forget what that guy's called. The scanner guy who turns off obscuring, Phobos Marines, rules like that, right? So you would set this guy up so he's in cover, so he's got a little bit more defensive profile, and it'd be overlooking a room, preferably like looking down this corridor right here, right? If you put your guy right here, he should have more or less full sight of the objective, especially if he's ignoring obscuring. If you don't have a guy that's ignoring obscuring, my recommendation is, like, if you are looking at this room, right, you would want to set a guy up who's got full line of sight through this hatchway without obscuring on this hatchway to the following hatchway. And if you really want to get technical, you can even take this a step further, right? You could set yourself up so you would be in a position where an enemy shooting at you through this hatchway would be not able to shoot you back, right? Let's say if I'm standing in this hatchway, let me grab a model. I have a model standing in this hatchway wanting to shoot at this guy over here, right? He would be unable to do so because if I were to draw a cover line through here, I'm going to be hitting this spot right here for obscuring. However, if I'm shooting here, I can draw a cover line over here and I can see this entire hatchway, right? So that's a little trick that you can use when setting up barricades. I typically don't do this because I find that when you're playing Into the Dark games, it's better to play aggressive. It's better to play really fast movement. The objectives on the map typically require you to really get out of your comfort zone and move away from your deployment zone to try and get at the objectives. And let me tell you, it is hard scoring primary in this game. So the more primary points you can score, the better. However, this is just a really useful trick. It puts pressure on the center objective, so it's something you can do. All right. Lastly, I'd like to talk about TacOps. So Into the Dark TacOps have changed a little bit. Not as much as I'd like them to, but that is what it is. So we're going to go through each TacOp, and I'm going to tell you which ones are probably the ones you want to take and which ones you probably want to avoid. So starting out, we're going to talk about Seek and Destroy TacOps. So Into the Dark has removed a number of TacOps, and as we go through each faction deck, I'll tell you which ones have been eliminated, but for Seek and Destroy, none of them have been eliminated. However, even if you can use these, I would strongly recommend avoiding these TacOps because of the difficulty of scoring. One thing I also want to go over is for measuring distances for any rule, you have to measure along the heavy terrain. So what do I mean by that? So let's say I want to measure the distance between this model. Normally, I would measure that from the center of the objective, and we're looking at what, 12.5 inches? Well, if this door is closed, I can't measure through heavy terrain. So I would have to measure around, and we're looking at about 14.2 inches. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind, right? So if you have a TacOp like, where did I put my TacOps? If you have a TacOp like Route over here, right? You have to score within 6 inches of your opponent's drop zone, right? Well, here's a problem. Here's your opponent's drop zone. If these doors are closed, it is impossible for you to score this TacOp, assuming that you do not have a model in this area, right? If this door is open, or actually a better example would be here. If this door is open, right, you would have to measure around the door. The door is a physical object. You would have to measure around the door. So you're looking at 4, and you're looking at roughly 6 right here. So that means if you are not in this area, you cannot score Route if this door is closed. So a lot of the missions are like this, where it's very, very difficult to score location-based objectives like Route. So I would not recommend this TacOp. Deadly Marksman. Here we go. So Deadly Marksman kind of follows a similar path where you have to get a kill from your deployment zone. Actually, I think it's within 3, right? Wholly within 3 of your deployment zone. All right. So that means if you select this TacOp, you have a gunner that pretty much can't move past this line, right? This is where your gunner can go until he gets a kill, right? So you can pretty much set up right there, which is doable, to be fair. But it's really limiting, and depending on the mission and the type of team your opponent's using, they can play around that, so that gunner is going to have a really hard time scoring. So I wouldn't say to never take it, but I would say it really depends on the team you're playing. It depends on your opponent and the mission you're playing, and whether or not you can set up. This particular mission allows for a situation where you could set up Deadly Marksman. However, there's other missions where that becomes a lot more difficult. What do I mean by that? Let me give you an example. Not junction assaults. Where is it? We'll stay. Here we go. Vault plunder. Yep, this one. All right. So we have vault plunder, for example, right? So again, you're looking at 3 inches from your drop zone. So if we measure that out, that's like roughly right here. It's going to be like following roughly this, right? I don't know why I'm bothering to measure this out. It's going to be following roughly that, right? It's going to be 3 inches. So your marksman is not going to have, assuming this guy's your deadly marksman, right? He's not going to have that many angles to play around with. You have a... What the fuck is this door right here? This isn't supposed to be here, right? No. I don't know why this door's here. Get out of here, door. Anyways, you're not going to really have any angles to play. Yeah, you could open this door, but you can't get up there. So you're going to be in kind of a vulnerable spot. And let's say you put a barricade here just to keep your guy a little bit more protected. Here's the problem. There is some dead zones in this room. If any of you guys understand close quarter combat, a dead zone is an area that you're not going to be able to see. So, boom. If somebody runs over here, you're not going to be able to see anybody. More so this side than this side. This side also has a bit of a dead zone, but you could technically move right here and maybe get line of sight onto something. But if they're going to be concealed, especially if they're like tucked into this corner, you're not going to be able to do it. Furthermore, over here, you're pretty much limited to looking down this area. We've got dead zones over here, dead zones over here, no line of sight. Looking into this room, it's even worse. I don't even think you'd really be able to get line of sight with anything, even with like a small model. You're looking at basically like this area right here with dead zones here, and then most of the room is a dead zone. And then on the far side over here, you could pretty much get line of sight on anything in this room except for like a small dead zone back here. But it's still not ideal. So if you're taking deadly marksman, make sure that you are positioning yourself in a way that would allow you to score that. So you need to look at the mission you're playing, you need to look at the terrain you're playing, and ask yourself, can I set myself up in a position that's going to be able to score this? So this goes in the okay pile. Next is challenge. So challenge is select an operative in the first turning point and select one friendly operative. If that operative is incapacitated by the friendly operative, you score 1 point. If you achieve the first condition while the enemy operative is within 6 inches of friendly operative, you score 1 point. This is a pretty solid one. If you have a guy who's like super powerful, typically a squad leader, and you know someone's going to be playing aggressive with an enemy model, by all means, take this. It's pretty good. You know, for example, you have this big bastard over here. If you set him up and you know somebody's going to be charging you with them because they're playing Geller Pox infected, so they're usually going to be moving their big guys up, you can take your gunner or you can take your leader and position them in a way to take them down. Just keep in mind that in order to get 2 points, you're going to need to kill them within 6 of the friendly operative. So either in melee or in close range. Something to keep in mind. So I would say that this is not bad. Rob and ransack. So reveal this TacOp when an enemy operative is incapacitated by by a friendly operative within 1 inch of it. And that friendly operative is more than 3 inches away from other enemy operatives. So you score 1 point if you kill a guy, right? And that guy's got to be 3 inches away from his buddies. At the end of the battle, if you achieve the first condition and that friendly operative has not been incapacitated, you score another point, right? So basically, you need to kill a dude and then make sure that the guy who killed that dude stays alive. So this TacOp, I will say in the games that I've used, I rarely score 2 points with it. However, it is a very easy TacOp to get 1 point on. As long as you're playing a team that even just has one guy who's pretty okay in melee. It's pretty easy to score 1 point on. So I would say that is a really good TacOp to take. Headhunter. So reveal this TacOp when the enemy leader is incapacitated. You score 1 point. If you did this on turn 1 or 2, score an additional point. So I'm going to be honest with you. Into the Dark is a very passive game on turn 1. I think it's more likely than not you're not going to encounter your opponent on the first turn. Okay, I see why this terrain loaded in. I think there's terrain already loaded in on it. Anyways, so most of your games are going to kind of look like this, where you have positioned your guys like right here. Your opponent has positioned their dudes right here. And everybody's going to be kind of close to each other, but all the doors are going to be closed. There's going to be maybe a couple situations where there's like a door or two open, but you're not going to have many opportunities to engage your opponent on turn 1. And if they know you're going seek and destroy, say if they know you're a seek and destroy team, they're probably not going to be positioning their leader in a vulnerable spot. Probably just in general, they're not going to be positioning their leader in a vulnerable spot. So I would not recommend taking this TacOp. I think it's a terrible TacOp in Into the Dark, and honestly probably a terrible TacOp in Kill Team in general. Unless you're fighting Gellerpox infected in open play, then by all means take this. The last one is Execution. So Execution is a TacOp that I think is normally pretty good in open play. And what I mean by open play, I mean normal Kill Team that's not Into the Dark. So reveal this TacOp at the end of any turning point in which more enemy operatives than friendly operatives were incapacitated during that turning point. At the end of the battle, if more enemy operatives than friendly operatives were incapacitated during 2 or more turning points, score 1. 3 or more turning points, score 2. So if you're playing a passive team that kind of does little jabs throughout the game and then focuses on mission play, it's pretty easy to get Execution. However, I've found that Into the Dark is a very, very, very lethal game. The objectives are super close. There's no terrain in the maps unless you're, putting in barricades. And the objectives tend to be in these like really close quarter rooms that really favor like melee oriented operatives. So even if you're taking like a really passive team, like for example Corsairs, you're gonna lose half your team minimum. More than likely you're gonna lose most of your team, and you're gonna end the game with like 1 or 2 guys alive. And that's gonna be true for like both players on the team unless it's a complete blowout. So I would say, unless you're playing in an elite team like a Space Marine team, and Space Marines are, maybe Gellerpox, you could maybe make an argument for. Unless you're playing a big elite team like that, I would probably leave this at home. So if you're looking at Seek and Destroy, these are probably the 3 TacOps that you're going to be taking. Now, I will say, if you have access to faction TacOps from whatever faction you're playing, obviously, if you're a companion team, you don't have access to that, I would strongly recommend putting those in. Now, let's look at the next category. So these are going to be security. So, as I mentioned earlier, security is going to be losing some TacOps. So they lose Seize Ground and Hold the Line, which is really massive for security, because these are 2 TacOps that are typically something that security teams like to take. So you're going to have access to damage limitation, central control, plant banner, and protect assets. So right off the bat, I'm going to tell you, central control is a little awkward to play around on some of the missions. So if you look at the center, you can see the center is inside heavy terrain. Now, there's a rule in this saying you can't measure through walls. As you can see, the center of the terrain, or center of the board, is inside a wall. Now, a lot of people just kind of house rule it and say, okay, obviously the intent is just measure away from the wall, right? But even if you do so, you have to understand that you're going to be accessing this in different rooms. So first of all, if you just measure right here, you have access to it right here. However, you're measuring through this wall, so I would say that you don't have access to it, right? Same thing over here. So that means the only areas that you're going to be able to score central control is going to be these two central rooms. And they're kind of situated like right in an awkward spot in kind of the, well, one's in the room's dead zone and the other is like literally right in front of the hatch right here. So it's something to keep in mind, like depending on which angle you're taking it from. If you're going in here, that's safe. But if you're on this side trying to score, like keep in mind that your opponent could just like shoot your guy in the incomplete opposite right here, right? So with that being said, I've actually found that central control is pretty easy to score, assuming that you're playing a high mobility team. Or a team with a lot of models. So if you're playing an Eldar faction, or if you're playing an Imperial Guard faction with a lot of models and a lot of movement, central control is a really, really solid thing. I just realized that I don't think Corsairs can score it, but I'm pretty sure Harlequins can. So central control is great. Damage limitation. This is again a TacOp that I would have never considered in open play. Typically because of the teams that I usually gravitate towards. I like high action teams. So, you know, Imperial Guard or, well, usually just Imperial Guard. or Eldar to an extent too, where I'm going to be trading pieces. So I normally don't take this. However, in Into the Dark, like I said, this game can be really, really passive until like kind of the mid to late game. So you have to make sure that you're not losing anybody on turn 2 and turn 3. Well, depending on the mission, like that's actually pretty doable, right? On this mission, you just have to activate these objectives to unlock the vaults, right? And then these vaults are actually scored at the end of the game, meaning I don't have to put any models in here to score primary throughout the game. So in this scenario, if I'm playing the Vault Plunder mission, I could do damage limitation, shut these two doors, and sit in this room and max that TacOp out. That's actually pretty freaking good. So, like I said, it depends on the situation. It depends on the mission you're playing. However, I do not think that this is a bad TacOp to take. All right, so we have these two. I think they're pretty solid. Next is Protect Assets. So another TacOp that I'm kind of iffy on in open play. Sometimes I think it's pretty solid if you're going to see a team that's really going to push primary. But usually there's just better TacOps to take. However, in Into the Dark, most of the fighting that you're going to be doing is around objectives. And the reason for that is because objectives are in these central rooms, right? So more often than not, your opponent's going to be putting models on these objectives. So this is actually not a bad TacOp to take because of the focus on fighting on objectives, right? And lastly, I want to talk about Plant Banner because this one's kind of a contentious one, right? Plant Banner is normally like a pretty big staple for security TacOps. In open play, I would say this is a really easy TacOp to score 1 point on, and pretty reasonable to get 2 points on it every game you take it, right? Assuming that you're putting it on the correct model and playing him correctly, right? However, like I explained, when you're measuring anything, you have to measure around the heavy terrain. You can't measure through it. So if you're trying to plant your banner 6 inches here, well, here's something. If I think that you have the banner, I can close these doors on you and I can deny that banner, right? You drop your banner token right here, right? And that's within 6, right? Actually, you could drop it further away. So you have your banner token right here. And let's say you are even a diligent player and you say, nope, you cannot crush my banner because I'm going to stick this guy right on it. Well, I could walk one of my dudes up and just say, nah. And guess what? That banner is not scoring any points now. So that's something you have to consider, okay? I'm not saying that you can't get max points on this, but what I am saying is it's really freaking hard to get into your opponent's deployment zone. It's really, really hard to get into your deployment zone because of all the terrain you have to navigate around and all the enemy operatives that you're going to have to move around. It's really hard to sneak a guy in your deployment zone. It's not unreasonable to get within 6 and score 1. However, like I just explained, there's a lot of counterplay to that because you can just shut the door and all of a sudden you're kind of just not scoring anything. So I would recommend you not taking plant banner unless you are absolutely certain that you can get in your opponent's deployment zone. So these are probably, if you're doing security, these are probably the TacOps that you would be wanting to look at. Obviously, mixing in faction TacOps too. All right, so let's look through the next group. So this is going to be infiltration, and let me tell you about infiltration. Infiltration is arguably the best TacOp archetype to take. It's probably a toss-up between Recon and Infiltration. I think Infiltration wins out because it's just a little bit easier to do than Recon is, depending on the team. But right off the bat, Sabotage is removed from the TacOp deck. And that is a massive blow because teams that are taking Infiltration are always taking Sabotage because it's just, if you set it up correctly, it's such an easy TacOp to score that it's usually a staple in any Infiltration deck. However, you have some really good TacOps on here, so it doesn't feel as hard to max out your TacOps without Sabotage. So right off the bat, we have Interloper. This is kind of a weird one. Again, looking at the deployment zones, it's kind of awkward to score. You have to be on your opponent's kill zone edge. A lot of these missions, I mean, you can see it right here. We have corner deployment, right? These are set up, these are set up, these are set up. Corner deployment, corner deployment, corner deployment. So that is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So fully half of the missions are going to be corner deployments. Okay? Why is that important? Well, let's look at this, right? Your opponent's kill zone edge is right here. That means we're going to load in the grot. Give me a second. I want to load in the grot because I want to use this guy as an example. Not because he's particularly special at all, but this is fun. Where are you, grot? There you are. All right. So we have our deployment zones, right? We have player B's drop zone, and this is going to be located right there. So that means your opponent's kill zone edge is right here. Well, guess how freaking easy Interloper is. Open the door, boom, you're scoring Interloper. So this TacOp is extremely easy to score if you're doing corner deployments. If you're not doing corner deployments, you can still pretty reasonably score it. But keep in mind that, you know, if you have abilities like the grot, there's no terrain back here to really shoot your grappling hook over, except to like, you know, maybe like this wall right here. So you're going to have significantly less areas to grapple over too. So that's something to keep in mind, but I've found that this one's been pretty reasonable to score. So that's a win in my book. Upload viral code. So this one kind of follows the same problem that like Plant Banner and Route have, right? You've got to do this within 6 inches of your opponent's drop zone and not within 2 inches of any operatives. I find this personally really, really difficult to score, especially because you have to factor in it's a 2 AP action. So it's really hard to set up these plays. It is still possible, but Infiltration has access to so many other good TacOps that I think this is a hard pass. I would never recommend taking this. Behind enemy lines, similar thing with Plant Banner, where you have to get in your opponent's drop zone. I just wouldn't recommend it. It's just too hard to get into drop zones and into the dark, so I would say hard pass. So we have Capture, Hostage, and Infiltrate. So this is the one where you kill a guy and you pull your guy off and you score a point. And then if you do that on turn 3 or 4, you'll score 2 points. Okay? So this is super good, right? There's no requirements at all for positioning. All it is you got to kill a dude and you remove one of your guys, and that's it, right? You're going to be doing a lot of close combat in Into the Dark, and there's guys going to be dying both in the beginning of the game, in the middle of the game, and in the end of the game. So this is a really great TacOp. I would always recommend taking this if you're taking Infiltration. And then to kind of further that up is Implant. So you reveal this when you would strike an enemy in combat. Instead of inflicting damage on an opponent with a strike, you would implant them instead. Basically, you implant one guy, you store victory point, and if you implant an additional 2 other operatives, you score another point. So if you implant 3 dudes total, you score implant. And exactly the same as Capture, Hostage, and Infiltrate. You're going to be fighting a lot of dudes in melee Into the Dark, and pretty much any team that has access to Infiltrate will have no problem scoring these 2 TacOps and more than likely maxing them out. So Infiltration, I think, is really well set up to play Into the Dark. So these are what I would recommend if you're taking Infiltration. Okay. Lastly, we have Recon. So Recon loses out on Vantage, which is a big blow because Vantage is something you always want if you're doing Recon. It's the easiest one to score because usually you're going to have Vantages right outside of your deployment zone in most maps. And it doesn't require interacting with your opponent at all. So it's really not. Fuck you. All right, so you have a couple here, right? You have a couple here. So I want to talk about this because there's kind of 2 different play styles you can go with Recon. First of all, let's talk about Overrun. I want to talk about this one first. So this one's kind of a weird one. So again, if we load in the map corners right here, as you can see, you can get 2 quarters in this room and 2 quarters in this room. So that way if you're playing Overrun, I strongly recommend you pay attention to specifically these areas right here. Let's say I am blue side and I'm playing Eldar, right? And I'm looking to score Overrun on turn 1. All right. Well, I would measure out these spots and I would go, okay, I want my model to be here. So this is technically in this table quarter, right? So in order to measure that out, we want him to be as far away from that hatch as possible because that puts him at the safest possible location. And we'll put the barricade up right there. Okay? And in fact, I would probably put the barricade exactly 1 inch away from that spot. As long as that's outside of 2, which it looks like it is. just to kind of further like impede the movement of any models that are coming in here. So all you would need to do to position for overrun is select a model, put him right there, make sure this door is open, because raw rules as written, I still think that you have to be able to draw like a line through. I don't think you'd be able to measure through the terrain here, but maybe I'm wrong on that. But as long as you have these doors over, there's no one who can argue that you're not going to be able to score this. So all you have to do is move into this room. You have this guy right here. You're going to have a dude right here. And boom, you've got all four. So I've actually found Overrun to be significantly easier to score in Into the Dark if you have access to high mobility and or dash abilities outside of activation. So like I'm talking about Eldar Corsairs being able to dash when they play Plunderers, or Veteran Guard doing Into the Breach, or even using your scouting recon dash with performing a free dash. Stuff like that will allow you to get into place in order to score Overrun. Now, something I would highly recommend you not doing is putting this guy out as like one of your first activations, because that's going to allow your opponent to react to that and maybe potentially kill him. You want to save this play for one of your last activations, so this guy is going to be as safe as humanly possible when he moves there. And you should also not put a valuable operative up here. You want to put somebody you're going to be looking at as expendable. So I think Overrun's really great. Plant Signal Beacon. Let's talk about this one. So this is a very, 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 very easy TacOp to score if you are playing a Recon team on an open board. Pretty much every single team that has Recon has access to reduce the AP of this mission action to either 1 or 0 and be able to score that on the last turn and just get an automatic 2 points. I think it's still pretty reasonable to do that if you are playing a team that is able to reduce the AP of that action, right? So if you're playing Eldari Corsairs, last turn, you just zip over here, drop within 6. The fact that you can still score 2 points and you just have to be within 6 of the drop zone allows for a lot of play. However, you have to think about maybe taking a different TacOp if you're playing a faction that is not able to reduce the action cost on Plant Signal Beacon. And the reason why I say that is because if you're playing a team with low mobility, but you're still taking Recon, you have to factor in the fact that you're going to be moving around. If you have a guy who's going over here, it's going to take you 2 to 3 turns to get over here. And you're going to have to be fighting enemy models in addition to that. So this is going to be a judgment call for you. I would say if you're playing an Eldar faction, you still take this. If you are playing Tau, like Pathfinders, maybe consider taking something else, but I think it's still kind of doable with them. I would say other factions, unless you're able to get like an APL 3 operative, or if you're able to reduce the cost, I would avoid taking this. So this one kind of goes into the maybe category. If you're playing one of the factions that I mentioned that's good for, I would say it's an automatic take. Otherwise, probably you pass over it. So we'll put it here for now. Triangulate. So Triangulate is really, really good in open play. I feel like most games you're taking it, you're definitely scoring 1 point. You're usually scoring 2 points. And Into the Dark, it's like a guarantee that you're going to be scoring 1 point. It's really easy to safely get models to different sides of the board. The board itself is smaller, so there's less distance you have to travel in order to get to the other edge. And in addition to the board being smaller, it's less distance you have to travel to get to your opponent's edge. So overall, I think Triangulate was a really strong TacOp, and in Into the Dark, I think it's an even stronger TacOp. So this is a definite take. Retrieval. So this is the one where your opponent puts an objective down. And this has got to be not within 3 inches of their drop zone. So normally you would look at this and go, okay, this is a bit shit. And I would probably agree with you. However, in Into the Dark, more than likely, they're going to be putting the retrieval tokens in front of a door. Because if you look at it, like, even if your opponent... I'm trying to look at, like, the most inconvenient spot to take it, which would either be, like, right here. I'll mark that. Or, like, right here. Even if they were to drop the token right here or right here, this is still pretty reasonable to get a model in here. I mean, you're looking at, like, from your drop zone, you're looking at 22 inches. So this would take 2 turns of moving and dashing to set you up in a position where you could go and grab this. So I think this is actually a pretty reasonable TacOp to take. Now, I want to add in, if you are playing a faction like Kroot, if I can find Kroot, here we go. If you're playing a faction like Kroot, and you have the dog models who can perform pickup actions while they're moving, this is going to be always something you take. Retrieval is really easy to score if you have the dogs, and all you have to do is be holding the objective at the end of your turn, or at the end of the game, to score 2 points. Carrying the objective to score 2 points. And if you're scoring, if you're within 2 inches of the objective, then you'll score 1 point. So it's really easy to do with the Kroot dogs. If you're taking a faction with dogs, aka at the moment Kroot or Star Striders, this is something you always take with them. So whoops, no, let's put in the auto take section. Actually, no, we'll put it with Beacon. I would say if you're taking dogs, it's an auto take. If not, it's still a reasonable one to take. But it'll depend on your faction TacOps selection. So actually, we'll put it over here though, because I'm going to look at Mark Target here for a second. I'm going to be honest with you. I've never liked Mark Target. I don't think it's good in open play. I think you can score it if you're playing something like Pathfinders. Otherwise, I think it's a little awkward to try and score. Into the Dark, I think it's the same, if not worse. So I think if you're Pathfinders, I think there's an argument for taking Mark Target. So basically, this is like Implant Attack, except it's a shoot action. And it's actually worse than Implant Attack, because Implant Attack is you're just using a hit. So you can still kill the opponent if you implant them. You just have to use a hit to implant. Whereas this one, you not only have to get through their armor saves, so they have to fail armor saves, but you're also not allowed to do any damage to your opponent. You completely forgo any ability to deal damage to your opponent and instead spend your turn marking them. Also, you can't score both points on the same turn. You have to do it in a subsequent turning point. Whereas Implant Attack allows you to, if you have it set up, you could score it all in one turn. So I think this is a terrible TacOp that you should never take. Maybe if you're Pathfinders, you could... Nope. Don't even take it if you're Pathfinders. All right. So I would say you have 2 really, really strong TacOps for Recon with Overrun and Triangulate. And then you have 2 situationally strong TacOps with Retrieval and Plant Signal Beacon. I think both of these in their respective situations are an automatic 2 points, but you have to have the right circumstance and the right team in order to score those 2 points. So that's going to be a judgment call on you. So that's something to consider. So that is going to be all the things we're going to go over today.